This is more about like the Bitcoin ETF
Yes.
and sort of not Janet Yellen, Elizabeth Warren's sort of warpath against Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and just tech in general, really. I see this sort of like Elizabeth Warren, Gary Gensler sort of camp, Biden camp, really against tech, it just seems like, specifically crypto and Bitcoin. So we have on one hand, we have like Wall Street jumping in with this ETF. On the other hand, the government's like really coming heavy-handed. Let's start with the ETF side. So at this point, I mean, shoot, man, it looks like any day we could see a handful of ETFs get approved. Maybe by the time this recording even shows up, we don't know.
January 8th. We know it's certainly not going to be before the 5th. We know.
Okay, there we go.
The reason why
Are you saying that's the soonest, or you think that's what you're calling as the date?
I think it's most likely to happen on the 8th, but we know it's not going to happen before the 5th, and there's a real reason for that. Because what they did is they retooled some of the comment periods for the ETFs. The SEC said that some of the comment periods will extend through January 5th, which is a Friday. And I think it's the Franklin one, a couple others. And the reason why it would be very unlikely, I mean, it's possible. I assume that you could have approval, but it's very unlikely for them to issue in the Federal Register that people can comment on these ETFs and issue feedback and then suddenly approve it. Right before then, that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. They typically allow the comment period to expire, and the latest comment period is January 5th. So my bet is the following week after the 5th.
Okay, interesting. We'll see. I don't disagree. It looks like just the last couple days, the amount of chatter happening, and not just the chatter. The next thing I want to bring up is it's not just the chatter. It's like the increase of meetings happening between these ETF applicants and the SEC, but more specifically, the changes that they've had to start making to these applications.
Which is genius for them, right? I mean, have you broken down these on other podcasts? The changes?
No.
Okay.
Go ahead. Let's do it. So give me your attorney hat.
Yeah. No. It's really actually. I view it basically, and again, I'm speaking for only myself and no client or my firm, but I'll just tell you, I view it as basically an act of retaliation against Grayscale, and I'll explain why. Because they are insisting on this issue of the cash creates for the shares. Basically, for the creation purposes of shares, they want the entities, the ETFs, they really had a sort of their foot down on this, and that's what a lot of the meetings have been about. They want the ETFs to go buy Bitcoin with cash, as opposed to creating shares through people tendering over Bitcoin to the entity. The in-kind creation is what it's called. And the reason why that's really significant is that all the other ETF vehicles out there, other than Grayscale, they are, in many respects, although they may want to have a better source of Bitcoin, just letting in kind, it's not as consequential for them because they can just go source the Bitcoin, buy it with cash, and they use that to fill up their ETF structures. Now, Grayscale is a different story, right? As you know, Mark.
But before we jump to the Grayscale, let me just ask you to clarify this for me. So they went to being cash settled as opposed to physically settled.
No, not settled. Creation of the shares.
So this means that instead of I'm going to give them cash, and they're going to take that cash and they're going to go buy Bitcoin.
Correct. Exactly right.
They're actually going to go physically buy it and hold it.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
If I want to cash out, they'll sell the Bitcoin in the market and give me my cash back?
Correct. So the way to think about it is this, okay? You have an original structure of the trust, right? And the trust just has shares. Just think of it like any company, okay? You have shares of the company. How do you create those shares? How do you determine if we're going to issue shares, how are you going to actually create them? And the reality is that what Grayscale used to do is they used to let people send over their Bitcoin, and they would give them locked up shares. Do you remember that? That's how the premium was extracted for a long time. Yeah. So that was an in-kind contribution. They basically said, here's my Bitcoin, you take that, you give me shares, and they were extracting premium. Now, what they're trying to get people to do is they say, you can issue as many shares as you want, you can create as many shares as you want, but you have to create those shares with cash. It's called a cash create. Whereas, say I have a bunch of Bitcoin, I've got 50 Bitcoin, and I want to go, buy an equivalent amount of shares. I can't tender to BlackRock my Bitcoin and get the shares. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
But why does that matter?
Why is that significant? Why does that matter? Because with Grayscale, okay, Grayscale already has a ton of Bitcoin, okay? And if they're going to insist on the conversion has to be a cash creation of shares, if they're going to uplist their ETF, okay, basically transform the GBTC to an ETF, what they're effectively going to have to do is they're going to have to then get cash from people, and they can't convert this big honeypot of Bitcoin that they have to the ETF structure. There's no way to do that without basically selling the Bitcoin in the open market, which they have to realize a tax loss on, which is big deal, right? Like if you're selling Bitcoin you acquired at 15,000, which Grayscale did, there are tax consequences or potential tax consequences that makes it structurally a lot harder for Grayscale to convert than a new entity like all these new ones that have filed, where all they need is cash. They can just go out into the marketplace, buy the Bitcoin, issue the shares. Boom, it's done.
So a lot of this move you're thinking is sort of by push Grayscale out of the running, because they're probably going to bring in several at one time to sort of maybe whatever in the era of fairness or whatever. But this gives them a way to sort of put that out, and maybe the BlackRocks, et cetera, don't like this maybe unfair advantage that Grayscale has by already having all these customers and shares, or not shares but Bitcoin.
I don't think it's driven. This is just my supposition here. I don't think it's driven by what BlackRock or the other participants want. I think it's more just the SEC is very frustrated with Grayscale. They lost in court against Grayscale, right? And if they can kind of put in place a structural barrier that doesn't prevent them from converting, but it makes it very painful for them to convert, why not? I mean, I think that's their rationale. I think that's why it seems kind of silly to focus so much on this. We don't want in-kind share creation. I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense, to be honest. But if they can twist the knife a little bit and cause a little pain, I think that's their rationale. And from the perspective of Grayscale, right? It's a big deal. Like having all this Bitcoin, now they got to figure out how to convert it. It's not going to be as simple as just a new market participant just spinning up an ETF and just saying, okay, I've got the cash, I'll create the shares.
About a month ago, I was in Dallas or Fort Worth for the Texas Blockchain Association, and I sat at dinner with about 10 people that were all very, very connected. I don't want to drop their names here, but let's just say some ETF people, some regulatory people, some lawmakers. It was a pretty good table of who's there. We got into these conversations, and again, we have some ETF people there at the table, and they were explaining to me that, like the BlackRocks, et cetera, a lot of people are expecting this, massive bump, but they're trying to front run it. As soon as these ETFs get approved, the price is going to go up because they're all going to go buy this massive amount of Bitcoin. They're like, that's not how it works. Like, they've already been building these seed accounts or these buffer accounts. These Grayscale, or not Grayscales, but the BlackRocks, et cetera, they can't be buying and selling in the market every day. They can't move the market, so they have these buffer accounts they've already established, and they'll buy and sell from their buffer accounts, these seed accounts, and then these seed accounts will be managing sort of the market. So they've already been buying all year. The ETF will have to go buy at market price from that vehicle. So I don't know if you know anything about that, if you think that's true or not. And if so, then it would seem like then Grayscale could just do something similar. They set up a Grayscale ETF that then just buys the Bitcoin from the trust.
They could do that as long as they're willing to pay the taxes, right? And that impacts the value of the shares. So it's conceivable that if they were to do what you're talking about, they're going to realize tax events, and that could continue to contribute to the shares of the trust trading at a discount to the Bitcoin they hold.
Right.
Which
that makes sense.
That's the real problem. Again, this would not prevent in any way Grayscale from converting. It just makes it a little bit more painful and a little bit more onerous.
They should have done it last year when it was at 15,000. Now doing it now, they're kind of stuck. Okay, so I like that you broke that down for me. I appreciate that, because I was thinking it was more cash settled, and so it wasn't really they're buying the Bitcoin. It wasn't really going to affect the supply-demand metrics of Bitcoin. But you're not saying that. It's just more about the redemption, the addition, and the subtraction of the cash.
It'll absolutely be spot Bitcoin. They're buying. Nothing's going to be cash settled. It's all about how do you create the shares.
Yeah. Now, you were saying that you maybe don't think this is that big of a catalyst. I think you made a point. Is that accurate?
The ETFs?
And when I say a catalyst, the ETFs being approved is not going to be that big of a catalyst for the price of Bitcoin.
I think it's already been a catalyst. I think, the notion that people, savvy market participants, don't read the tea leaves and they're going to wait until day one to buy the spot Bitcoin ETF, I'm sure it will lead to flows, and I think it will contribute, in a positive way. I think that it's already sort of triggered a bull market here, and I think you've seen a lot of it. The estimates are all over the place. There were some folks at Bloomberg that I was talking with that, they estimate in the first year it could be 10 billion. I know that there are other people on Twitter that are wildly bullish. They think it's going to lead to hundreds of billions of dollars in inflow. We don't know, right? But as you know from markets, right, expectations are everything. So if if the expectations are like 10 billion and you end up getting 10 billion, to me, I think that's in large part, not totally, but in large part, that's been priced in. Now, if the expectations are 10 billion and you get 100 billion in inflows in the first year, that's massive, right? That'll be a huge catalyst. But markets are interesting in this way that market participants don't wait until the actual event to position themselves. And I would expect that the reason we're sitting at 44,000 or whatever it is as of today, 43,000, is because people have already read the tea leaves and realized that this is sort of priced in. That's not a reason, by the way, to be bearish and think that we're going to have some crash or cascade down. But I would not be surprised if post ETF we're sitting in the 40s or 50,000, and then we continue upward trend maybe for the next 6 months to a year. But I guess when I'm making that comment, I don't, Mark, believe that you're going to have they talk about this God candle, right? Where the day the ETF launches, we're going to go up $20,000 or $30,000. I don't believe that. I could be wrong. I don't have a crystal ball, but that's just my gut.